Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Chris, otherwise known as M.Christian. This is the first of hopefully several recordings I'm going to be making and posting, both to possibly iTunes and definitely as a video to YouTube. I hope you bear with me. This is one of my first ones. I'm still kind of learning this as I go along. Today I'm going to be reading the story Some Assembly Required, which appears in my new collection of science fiction, fantasy, and horror called Love Without Gun Control that is currently available as an ebook, as well as a print edition from the fabulous folks at Renaissance eBooks Futures Past Edition. If you're curious about how much this is and how to order it, you can check my website at www.mchristian.com. Just for your FYI, the print edition is a wonderful $15.99. The Kindle edition is a $5.95. So it's pretty affordable. Anyway, this story is one of my favorites. It's fairly short, so you don't have to listen for too long. It originally appeared in Talebones Magazine in the fall 2000 issue, and it's been reprinted in this book. I'm going to start now. If you're watching this on the video, I'm going to throw a couple of interesting images up there, sort of background. Unfortunately, if this is obviously being listened to on iTunes, you won't get that wonderful treat, but there you go. This is called Some Assembly Required. She hasn't thought about Mark in years. Then suddenly she did. It wasn't something obvious like seeing his face on someone else's who had the same pale blonde hair like burnished steel or eyes like amber marbles, but something swift and intangible like a floating piece of consciousness you remember as not being fact, reality, but part of a dream half forgotten. Lisa had been standing in the warm sunshine down on Solano Avenue, walking back with her sister from seeing a movie, something with explosions and lots of male sweat, details already mostly forgotten. They'd parked far away and chatted emptily as they marched back to Lisa's battered little sports car. She'd had a tension about him sometimes, an almost intangible armor that would slip over him. The first time it had happened, they'd fought later in the day, Lisa convinced on some level that she'd been the cause, but it had happened so quickly and without apparent cause, and had lingered for hours, and he hadn't spoken a word about it. Then the same had happened to Lisa in other relationships. It usually meant anger at her, a stewing resentment, just needing an impetus to release. Better, she had learned, to get it out when she wanted it to, beat the fight to the punch. Hot, hard sunlight in her eyes, and she replied mechanically to Shirley's polite, sisterly banter. Why now? Why think of that and Mark now? The laughter of children in front of a nearby toy store, an old woman glacially making her way down the sidewalk in a mechanical walker, a burnished Latino man clipping branches from a tree in front of a doctor's office. Some people just shouldn't have children, Shirley said, slipping into the passenger seat as Lisa absently hunted for the ignition. Lisa looked up, hunted for the source, and saw the three with the kids, two glowing parents and a friend. The parents were young and sleek with their own kind of baby fat, the softness that Lisa had seen around her other friends that had the innocence and responsibility of children thrust onto them. Luckily, Shirley said, her eyes obscured by sunglasses, other people can. Their friend wasn't sleek, wasn't soft. His hair was slightly greasy, his jeans rough and faded to shreds in some places. And even though he was smiling with his friends and the children he had to accompany, his tension was obvious. Lisa knew then, that fragment finding its place in her mind, the why of thinking of Mark. Yes, some people shouldn't have children, but other people, good, kind people, were terrified of them. It was night by the time she got back to her apartment, parking as usual in the darkness of the alley behind her building. After an afternoon with Shirley, Mark had faded into a cool melancholy, a lazy sadness about many things, old and nearly forgotten boyfriends, only some of it. At first she thought it was an insect. The fear, disgust, revulsion tingled up and down her spine. Then she thought it might be a toy, children being up way too late. But then she picked it up. Looking at it under her washed-out distant lights from the street beyond, she again thought specifically of the one old boyfriend and brought it inside. His breath had been hot. She remembered when it seemed about to scald her neck, how how she'd felt when he'd had to move just a little from under him, feeling it almost ready to burn her skin. He always seemed to have a bruise or two, looking like a swatch of grease on his angular body from where he'd hurt himself at work. The apartment seemed cold, empty, so she turned on the coffee machine and absently flicked on the set to keep her company. Her answering machine was beeping 111 in dark red, so she didn't play it, knowing it to be Shirley saying she'd be late for the movie. The little machine she'd found wasn't a toy. It was a kind of patched-together, crude look to it. Putting it down on the kitchen counter, it immediately started a hesitant exploration of its new environment. Smiling despite herself, she lunged to catch it as it neared an edge, only to have it pull away at the last minute. It had a couple of small motors, maybe scavenged from a toy after all. It had wire feelers and a mysterious cluster of dark glass panels along its back. Its body seemed to be a piece of old circuit board, the green material almost black in some places for being outside for so long. It seemed to have eyes as well, two discs facing forward. Yes, eyes, as it seemed to watch as it hunted along the countertop for light. It had a battery, a black box along its back, but must have fed, recharged, and what it could see, eating light through those glass panels on its back. Also on its back was a cigar tube. Picking it up, Lisa shook it, hearing something inside. Carefully, she unscrewed it, and a tightly rolled sheet of paper came out. Mark was very much on her mind. The gruff rumble of his voice, the deep avalanche of his laughter. For someone who saw tools as an extension of himself, he liked surprisingly subtle and sophisticated things. When he was crouched under some new machine or under some behemoth of gears and engines, Bach chimed from his speakers. When he stopped to eat, it was usually sushi or Thai, and while he enjoyed watching things explode and men sweat on the screen, he also had a complete Windwinders collection and worshipped Jacques Tate. The instructions on the paper were simple, straightforward, even for someone like Lisa, for whom Mark's terminology had been like listening to an ancient Asiatic language. She could actually understand it. It was also obviously a copy of a copy of a copy, the patterns of the diagrams in some places blurred by replication. She stayed up for a long time, staring at the instructions and thinking about Mark, while the little machine patiently explored its new world, charging its battery from her kitchen lights. The parts were surprisingly easy to find. 2 trips to 2 different electronics stores. Cheap too, or would have had been if she had some of the tools it required at hand. Practicing with the soldering iron, she thought a lot about Mark. She built him, assembled him from memory as she sent curls of acid smoke up towards the ceiling. Tall, thin, rough but not coarse, with a kind of mechanic's masculinity. Machines had been a special language for him, the key to a secret world of cause and effect. She remembered how his amber eyes glowed when he talked about some new project, some new device or construction, explaining to her innocence the philosophy of its gears, the beauty of its mechanisms. She didn't have any photographs, no letters. They hadn't been together long, 2.5, maybe 3 years. She couldn't remember why they'd broken up, exactly. She knew a lot of it was because of his passion and her revelation that, at best, she'd only be the second most important thing in his life. She burned herself, gesturing clumsily with the iron like it was a pencil or pen and not a very hot tool. The pain was like a flash in her eyes, and she dropped it, luckily on the table and not on the carpet. After sucking on the inside of her finger where the iron had touched and almost crying, she breathed deep a few times and went back to trying to get familiar enough with the unfamiliar tool. That fight they'd had was very present in her mind. They had gone to a picnic with her sister, who'd been babysitting a friend's 6-year-old. Mark hadn't made any noises when she told him about it, but then tension descended on him hard and fast whenever he was near a kid. Sally was a sweet girl, shy but very smart, and with laughter that sounded like chiming bells. Still, Mark had been terrified. Lisa hadn't known that, and so the fight. Beat him to it. Get it all out in the open. For a long time he just stood there and let her run all over the place, trying to figure out why he was so angry. Finally he said something, and then something else, and then she started to understand. That night they'd made love, and it had been different. Passionate, yes, but also caring. An act to seal up a wound that had been opened. When Shirley came over the next day, she saw the mess of electronic parts scattered on her kitchen counter. Toaster explode, she joked, picking up something only 3 days before Lisa wouldn't have recognized. Just a hobby, Lisa said, defensively, feeling as if Shirley had been picking through her bedside table, commenting on her method of birth control. Looks like something Mark would have put together. Spit and baling wire, couple of batteries, and voila, art. Too bad everyone else just saw it as some baling wire and lots of spit. Mark had never called it art. He might have treated it that way, but he never called it that. Yeah, Lisa said, grabbing her purse, but that's what he liked to do. Then, she said, not all that hungry, just to get her sister away, let's get a bite. I'm starved. You think about him, Mark, a lot. Sometimes, Lisa said, gently moving her sister towards the front door. You weren't together all that long, and then weren't even with him when he, passed away. At the door, she paused. Cancer, wasn't it? Yes, cancer. He didn't leave much behind, did he? I think you were the only person who knew him well, and that's not saying a lot. No, she agreed, locking her front door. Not a lot at all. She decided in the end to build 2 of them. That way she could have some practice and not put too much pressure on herself to get the one and only done perfectly. She burned herself twice more, but then felt like she was getting the handle on the iron. Her nose tickled for a long time from the resin reek of the melting solder, but then she started to enjoy it. It was like an incense from some distant mechanical land, something burned in Mark's church. It wasn't hate that had teased him that day in the park around dear little... It was responsibility. I was scared. Damn, I hate that. Hate that feeling. Like walking on glass. They're so fragile, he said. You know what it's like. How one wrong thing, well, it may not mean anything to me, but to them it could be how they see the world after. That freaks me out. I'm not ready to do it right, I guess. I'm too selfish. When I want to do it, I want to do it right. To be there all the time for them. To really be there for them. To help them. Now, though, the responsibility just scares me, is what he said. You just have to let go, she told him, holding him close and feeling his hot breathing on the side of her neck. Other people have the same fears, but they manage okay. You just have to learn to let go. It's how we go on. It's how you leave a part of yourself behind. You're just scared because you only want to leave the best of you behind. He nodded, his heavy body moving slightly too as his head did. I know. I just keeping that maybe I'm not good enough. The first one Lisa built had faltered, as if stricken with a kind of electronic mechanical palsy. She went back to the instruction sheet and spent a few minutes following its strange course. There, finally she saw it, a stray wire, a hesitant short. After a quick, skillful jab with the soldering iron, it seemed to work fine. At dawn, which seemed appropriate, she took copies she'd made of the instructions, put them in the cigar tube she'd bought, attached them to their backs, and let them go. The original moved across the alley, vanishing quickly off into the distance. Her first newborn started off to the right, slowly making its way among the trash cans and garage doors. The whine of its little electric motors went on for a long time, until fading into the general background of the city. The second born went to the left, darting across the dark asphalt, but then stopped just about halfway. It stayed there for a minute, spinning slowly as it sought nutritious sunlight. Finally, it stopped its dance and made its way slowly down the other side of the alley until vanishing among some parked cars. The tears were a surprise. There, before she was even aware that she was crying, she watched her descendants until they were able to make it on their own. Then she wished them well, gave them her love, and went back inside. Well, that was the story. Some assembly required. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to check out my website at www.mchristian.com. At the end of this video, you'll have some links and such like that. There are other, I think, even better stories in the book. I hope that you're teased and tempted enough to purchase it. I'm very accessible. If you wish to write me, my email is very simple. It's zobop, Z-O-B-O-P, at AOL.com. I do promise to answer all emails. Sometimes it takes me a little while, but I will definitely get back to you. And thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed listening to the story.